All right, so hold on. This episode is starting out with you doing a song. I don't know if I'm comfortable with this. No, I don't have a song. So what, a glimpse of stalking?
In olden days, a glimpse of stalking was looked on as something shocking. And then it goes, anything goes. Like, it's just talking about the moral degradation that happened in the 1920s, in the flapper days.
So is this the song like Anything Goes from like the musical Anything Goes?
Yes, exactly.
Oh, wow.
But you probably don't know,
you know this, but I
know the lyric. What are you saying about me?
That you're a 1920s nun?
Oh, yeah. All right, that's fair.
Is that okay?
No further comment.
Like, I don't want to insult you, but, you know, come on.
It's a Cole Porter song. And anyway, it's really hot here, and so it would be nice to have my ankles exposed for carmudgeoning. But I deemed that to be too risque.
That was too risque, yeah. I am once again in my underwear. But I see we're actually wearing the same t-shirt, so apparently we got the memo that we should both be wearing our Lancia Delta Integrale Wheel ISSIMI shirts, which are available for purchase some way, somehow, through a link, either like in the description of this or like a little pop-up that'll be
below
there
it.
or something. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. All I know is I got mine, and that's all that counts.
Yeah.
Selfish.
Too many layers.
Too many layers. It's very warm. It's all of a sudden summer here in the Bay Area. And
This week.
yeah,
It'll probably be 59 degrees and foggy.
61
the
and
day
raining
after.
on
Really?
Saturday. Yeah, so yesterday was 92, and we will go from 92 to 61, which literally in the Bay Area means going from the hottest day of summer to the coldest day of winter, basically.
Yes. San Francisco has the what is it? The ADD, I guess you'd call it. The weather is...
Yeah, I would just call it the most fucked up weather in the world. But if you don't like the weather, just walk 10 minutes. It'll be completely
that's
different.
also true.
I was looking yesterday when it was 92 at my house, and I'm kind of up in a hill, and I was looking at the weather station of my neighbors, whose house I can see, and it's probably 1,000 feet away, but kind of down the hill. It was 78 there.
What?
Yeah.
I don't believe that.
They're on the water, microclimates. Anyway.
So now we've reached the point of Carmudgeon where we're talking about weather, so that's how
We have
interesting
run
we
out
are.
of things to talk about because I don't drive any cars anymore, and I don't go anywhere, and I don't go to Cars and Coffees. Not true. Completely bullshit, actually.
When you used to drive cars, though, you mentioned to me that there have been a couple of occasions that you actually wanted to buy a press car, but normally that's not what happens, obviously, because most modern cars are... You always use the word isolation chamber, which obviously is the worst insult you could ever level at any car.
Unless it's a Rolls-Royce.
It's true. But you wouldn't want to buy one of those.
No, I've never offered to buy a Rolls.
Did you ever offer to buy a press car? Like you actually were like, I want to buy this.
Yeah, the first one, it happened a couple times actually. So like 20, I've driven 2,500 press cars or thereabout. I think I'm about to hit 2,500 on my little spreadsheet. And there have been 3 times that I offered to buy the car, which means I'm not a complete slut whore hoarder, because 3 out of 2,500 is not an appreciably large amount of cars.
This is why you're single.
This is also why I'm single. I'm single for so many reasons.
If you just go on 2,500 dates, then you might actually ask for a second date.
What makes you
3
think I haven't?
times?
I just described myself as a whore. Anyway, I think we need a topic change to go right back to the cars, and I'm just going to ignore where this other sub-conversation is going. I offered to buy the Mazda Super 20.
What is that?
It was an NC Miata. It was an NC1 that Mazda tarted up for, I believe it was SEMA back 100 years ago.
Oh, this is the one where they put the door handles from the NA on it, right?
Of all of the things I remember about the car, the door handles were not one of them. So I'm sure I have photos of it somewhere.
I have a book in my automotive library that has a picture of what I'm thinking of. It's like all SEMA'd out, and they came in they made 2 versions of it. I thought they made an orange one and a gray one, and they look kind of hot. They look really hot.
All right, so I'm color blind, and by that I mean I see color, but I forget. But I'm pretty sure this was yellow.
Okay.
Now
I'm sure you can find a photo.
Well, the annoying thing is we're going to put the inserts in for people watching on YouTube, and they're going to see what color it is, and they'll be like, that's not yellow, you moron, it was orange. But to me, in my mind, it was yellow, even though it could have been green.
It had its personality was yellow.
It was like the Super Bee. It was like buzzy, and it was like a bee, a bumblebee, and it was yellow, and it had black stripes or something. And I don't remember how it looked. All I remember was it had It was an NC1, and it had big fender flares, like enormous flares. And it had a Cosworth supercharger on it. And the most obnoxious, I think it was a Racing Beat exhaust I've ever heard in my life. It was horrible. But it was on coilovers, and it had really sticky tires, and it was insanely loud. And it was so fucking fast. And it was so fucking fast in the old school way of being fast. Like, this isn't right. It can't handle it. It's not geared properly for this. I remember finding... Oh, the siren's going off at your house. Sorry. I was just about to talk about definitely not driving illegal, so I hope that's not coming from me. I remember getting the V-Box out and trying to do a quarter mile, but I'm like, there's nowhere I can do a quarter mile in this car without someone calling the police because it was so loud. But I banged off a couple quick 0 to 60s in this flat section of road. And when I crunched the numbers, you're well into third gear by the time you hit 60 on that car. I think it redlined second, like 52 or 54 or something. With 2 shifts, it was still only 5.3 seconds. So, like with that car with a dual clutch with a, really great launch control and instant shifts would have been like 4.8 or 4.9. I mean, it was so nuts. And it was just, like launch and wah, ba, 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 like through the gear. So I had it, like I took the hardtop off. It didn't have a soft top in it. I took the hardtop off and I just threw it in my garage for a couple of days. And I remember calling Mazda PR, this great guy named Jeremy Barnes, who now is at Mitsubishi. And I'm like, hey, so you're not getting your car back. And he was like, what? And I was like,
it was
sorry.
a SEMA car, so it was like a one-off?
It was a one-off. It was a show car. And I'm like, I don't know how else to say this other than name your price. And he's like, yeah, funny. And I'm like, no, I'm dead serious. Tell me what it is. Like, he's like, I'm not selling it to you. I'm like, 35? Start at 35. What do you think? And he's like, Jason, I cannot sell you the car. I'm like, yes, you can, because you're not getting it back, so you might as well get money in exchange for it. I'm literally not giving you this car back. And he's like, it doesn't have a title. We can't sell it to you. And I begged and pleaded, and the answer was no. So I could not. I kept it for, I think, 2 or 3 weeks, because he's a sweetheart and he's a great guy, and he knew how much I was loving the car. But I actually did offer sort of blank check, like, name your price. I don't care. And he's like, just build one. And I'm like, this is done. I don't need another project car. It's all done. I just need the muffler. And he wouldn't sell it to me. So that was the first time I ever bought a car. So clearly what needs to happen is you need to put a supercharger on your NA.
Oh. I don't know.
I mean, it worked. I'll insert the video of the acceleration run, and it was just this wheel-hopping, disastrously abusive, horrible launch followed by lots of giggling. Like, huge amounts of giggling.
That sounds kind of scary. In the best possible way, of course.
It was fun. The car was just a riot. I don't think I've ever had as much fun in possibly any car ever. It was just hilarious. So that was one. And then the next one was actually a twofer. It was a very strange month in that I flew to Germany to drive the 911R. Mm-hmm. And then
I remember that video.
Yeah. That was actually when I flew back. There were 2 trips to Germany for that. But yeah, that car was magic. It was so good. I will say things that I didn't say in the review at the time. It was an ill-handling monster, fucking psychopath. It would step out on you when you didn't expect it. It was tough to manage.
Why was it like that?
I don't know. I have no idea. Didn't care. I mean, so we were literally sitting at lunch with Andy Preuninger, whose personal car I was driving because I wanted the green one. And we were talking, and I'm like, the thing stepped out. I was chasing Walter Verl on a back road. And the thing about Walter is, he's 141 years old. No, I mean, he's probably 70, somewhere around there. And he has not lost any of his desire to beat everyone else. So we were driving on back roads, and he was hauling ass. I mean, genuinely driving at a much higher rate of speed than I would ever feel comfortable to do. But I thought, well, I'm in an identical car to Walter. I have stability control. So I'm not going to get in that much of a wreck. And I can drive using his, the second car is never in as much peril as the lead car, right? Because you can use their brake lights as your extra set of eyes around corners and stuff. and we were really pushing. We lost all the other journalists, and so just completely left them for dead. And I was just having a blast driving at like 9.4 tenths or thereabouts on public roads, which
or 11.4.
Yeah, and at one point I think Walter was like, "I'm gonna have to show this kid who's boss," and which he's done to me on track before, and he's boss. Like there's just I'm not keeping up with him. And he fucking flung this car into this. It was like one of those like 80-degree rights that like that have like a big suspension compression.
Yeah, so it loads up the suspension, so you have extra grip.
Yep, and he at the top of the hill, like long before the corner, flung it in, drifted it sideways. And then it gathered it up thanks to the suspension compression, landed a little bit sideways and power slid out of it. Wasn't about to do that. This is one of the 4 prototypes that were made. And again, Andy Pointinger's personal car. So I got on the brakes and got sideways on the brakes. And then had a large moment through the compression that sort of sorted itself out. And again, stability on. Like this was not like, and I completely backed off. I'm like, I don't care if he wants to kill himself, but I can't wreck a car or kill someone. So the car was a little bit difficult to handle, but I didn't care because that's not part of the whole 911 mystique.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so that happened, and we got back to lunch, and one of the other journalists is a 911 fanatic and had a turbo at the time and was about to sell it, and he was like, "Listen, if you can get me one of these cars at list," because they were going for a lot more money than this price, I'll buy one. And they've sort of Porsche's PR and all the GT car guys know who he is and know that he's a Porsche enthusiast. And they're like, "Okay, we'll work on it. I mean, we'll see if we can get you an allotment for one." And I said, "Okay, look, there are 4 journalists from North America driving this car, and that's it. If you want to find me an allotment, I'll find a way to buy one." And they were like, "What?" And I'm like, if half of the journalists who have driven this car will buy one, I think you have no better way of marketing the car. Like there's just no higher praise. Like we are journalists. We don't make a lot of money. But I'll find a way. I'll sell a whole bunch of shit. I'll buy the car. And they were like, okay. So I leave there. I fly home. And I'm like, oh God, I hope they don't get a car because how the fuck am I going to pay for this? I'll find a way, whatever. And then I drove the Aston V12 Vantage S 7-speed manual. And that was a big problem because I thought, I genuinely want this car. Like genuinely. And now I've made it all these years, up to the point, like 10, 12 years, without ever offering to buy a car other than a Miata. And now we have 2 in 1 month that I genuinely couldn't decide between. And the Aston Martin guys were like, what do you think? And I'm like, it is the best sports car ever made. It is so my type of car. It doesn't look showy. It doesn't look like much. It's gentlemanly.
Except for it was white and orange.
Well, that was a terrible color combo on that video, that car, the press car. But, I thought like this thing in black or silver or some like reasonable color, I would genuinely sell almost everything I own to be able to make it work. So he's like, so you're telling me you'd buy one? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, well, if I can get you one, do you want one? Because they were only making 100. And at this point, they were giving me the bullshit line that they were all sold, even though they weren't. And I'm like, make it happen before Porsche gets me a 911R, and I'll buy it. And I just kept thinking, oh, well, if I bought a 911R for however much it cost, I would never lose money on that car. If I bought a V12 Vantage S, I would lose 90% of that purchase price in 5 years. Like they're just the depreciation tax.
That's not quite true, but I mean, you can get a 6-speed V12 Vantage now for like a little under 100 for a manual one, for a 6-speed one. And obviously the 6-speed is less desirable and more numerous than the 7-speed one.
They were what, 150, 160 new?
I don't know, maybe 200?
Yeah. So that is half off in 5 years.
That's not 90%.
Okay.
And I don't think they're going to go down anymore.
But let's be honest here. Like you lose $100,000 loss in 5 years.
Oh yeah. I'm not interested.
I mean,
I'm thoroughly disinterested.
$1,700 a month car payment, just the depreciation. Yeah, I don't.
That's before the clutch explodes,
or you need an oil change for $24,000 because don't you have to remove the entire intake manifold to get to the oil filter?
Really? Oh my God.
That's what I was told. I've never done one, but that's so. I all of a sudden I'm in this conundrum. Like, if either one of these car companies says yes, I am completely fucked. I'm gonna have to come up with $200,000. Luckily, neither one of them found me a car. So, and I'm sure they probably thought I was half serious, which I was. But I genuinely like. Here's the thing. All of these years later, this is what now? 4 years later, 3 years later. If you ask me, it's still the Aston I'm dreaming of. I don't want the 911R anymore.
Why don't you want the 911R?
Because I'd rather have a GT3 Touring for less money, and it revs higher.
Yeah, you get 500 more RPM. I think it's a little bit better looking. Also, the front bumper I think is a little bit more handsome.
Sure. I mean, you're trading rarity and scarcity for a better front end. To me, it was just
the engine.
And the engine. The 911R's problem was that it revved to 8,500, but the red line was at 87 or something online. So you couldn't hit the red line. It was maddening. Plus, I have driven a couple of 911Rs in anger, and they're a handful, and the Touring wasn't. The GT3 Touring I drove was not a handful. So I don't know what difference there are suspension between the two, but they sorted it out. In the same way that 991 GT3 was, GT3 RS was a absolute nightmare to control.
This is the purple press car that got written off.
There was a purple press car, and there was another one in Europe.
That also got written off by journalists.
Both cars. So the GT3 RS 991.1 had 2 press cars in the world, and they were both written off their first loan. And by the way, Randy Popst drove. He did not wreck the purple one. So we wrecked it. For those who don't know, that was Motor Trend had it, and we had it for a comparison test plus I think Performance Car of the Year, whatever it was, but it was a comparison test that we were doing, and it didn't make it through the first day. But Randy, when he was setting a lap time in the car, spun it a couple times, and Randy is a very strange driver because his first lap is his fastest. He doesn't need this warm up with the car. He doesn't need to warm up with the track. He just goes and he sets a fast lap time, and he can't beat it. Because now the tires are hot or whatever else happens. So, but Randy does that and goes right to 10/10ths without crashing cars, which is why he's such a huge asset to Motor Trend or to the industry, because we could put him in all means of cars and nothing happened, where you get somebody maybe a little bit younger, maybe a little bit less experienced or whatever, and they push too hard and write the car off. And that means you don't have a story, you don't have a video, you've cost a car company mucho dinero. They're pissed off at you. And somebody could get killed. Randy, I put him in my E30 Touring and go, have at it. I never even worried about anything with Randy. He did not push too hard, and he never spun cars. Still doesn't spin cars. You can push him, he can push right to the edge, and he'll come in and he'll be like, oh my God, I had a moment, but he doesn't loop it. And he looped the GT3 Touring, GT3 RS probably 3 times in trying to set a lap. And finally came back and he was like, it just doesn't it's 3 different spots on the track. It just went. And we were like, what the fuck is wrong with Randy? And then one of the other staffers wrote it off about an hour later. But the .2 completely fixed it. And I'm guessing that whatever happened there is all elastokinematics and other stupid little shit that we're down to such detail levels with those cars that they fixed it. Whatever they fixed for .2, they fixed in the 911 GT3 Touring. But I still want the Aston. That car's magic.
And that's kind of like peak Aston Martin. I mean, since then they seem to have changed their direction a little bit. Seems like they're in the news right now. You saw this, I'm sure.
Oh dear. All right, so they've just gotten a huge £500 million loan, or some rather enormous sum of money. I will say that Aston throughout the years, and this will be good for you, but I'll say throughout the years has made many a horrible heartbreaker car that looked incredibly appealing, but broke so much that the owners went broke and never owned another Aston.
Well, and the company also went broke. The company's history is just this long litany of going out of business over and over and over again.
The only thing it produced more than its cars was bankruptcy proceeding paperwork.
Yes, receivership.
Receivership. So yes, Aston Martin gained a very enthusiastic gentleman a couple of years ago, whose name, because I'm on, I know this guy's name, Andy Palmer. Andy Palmer, that's it. Andy Palmer I'm terrible with names, by the way. I'm not senile. Andy Palmer was a Nissan Infiniti exec up until about 2014, I think, and then got the job as CEO of Aston Martin, which
replacing Ulrich
Dr.
Bez,
Ulrich Betz,
who is very responsible for their modern turnaround that is embodied by the DB9 and the V8 Vantage.
Yeah, actually, that's a really good point because Betz is German or German speaking. He might be Austrian, but whatever, he's German.
It's a very German-sounding name, certainly.
Fucking mind. I mean, the man is like actually kind of nuts. Mm-hmm. Like I remember on one, I think it was V12 Vantage launch. We were in Palm Springs, and he was passing all of us on the press route drive. Like he mounted a GoPro to the front of his car and did the most heinous shit I've ever seen anyone do in someone else's car, like passing everyone. And there was snow at the top of the hill because it was some weird like weather situation in Palm Springs. Didn't slow that motherfucker down. He was such a good driver, such an enthusiast, got out of the car with a big smile on his face, and then made his minions play the video at lunch on his laptop for him so he could watch all the horrible things he had done and showed it to all. It was so cool to watch this guy. This guy was genuinely a car nut. And like in kind of like, if you imagine someone like us becoming a CEO of a car company, he's like, I want to make great shit. And they did. That's when V8 Vantage, DB9, all like the Virage and Special Editions, and Rapide were out. All of which were...
And V12 Vantage.
And V12 Vantage. Well, I'm sorry. Vantage as a car.
Oh, yes. DB9, DB9.
And I thought they were everything that an Aston Martin should be. And I want to go back to the history of it in a second and have you tell me whether I'm right or not. Meaning high performance, gentlemanly looks, but loud as fuck. Like, basically a British Camaro for very wealthy gentlemen who go, skeet.
It's very British.
Right.
Yes.
Like a Camaro lined with really great leather and wood and shit.
And made of aluminium.
Aluminium! The cars were just magic. And interestingly enough, in defense of modern Aston, when the V8 Vantage first came out, the 4.3 liter, it wasn't great. It was good. I liked it a lot. It was stunningly beautiful, but it didn't drive as well as it looked. And it wasn't until later iterations, and especially when they made the big change to the 4.7 liter, that they went through that car and turned it from something that was beautiful but good to something that was beautiful and drove every bit as good as it looks. And then when they did the V12S, which is the V12 engine with variable valve timing and a very, very short close ratio 7-speed, they hit peak sports car. That was all done under Dr. Betz. He, for whatever reason, pushed everything he did, then was pushed out. And he was replaced by this guy, Andy Palmer from Nissan, who is also a car guy. I met him only once, interviewed him at, I believe it was Geneva, at a car show, and he was foul-mouthed. I mean, dropping F-bombs all over, so I immediately liked him. Down to earth, none of this, elevated sort of upper crusty British blah, blah, blah shit. Sort of a guy. And was like, yep, I'm going to make a truck. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that and whatever. And other than a lack of, I hate to say this is kind of mean, but other than a lack of sort of British refinement, you sort of associate Aston Martin with being very, very formal and whatever. He was just kind of a little, I don't want to use the word trashy, but a little bit regular guy for Aston. I thought the world of him. Other than that, I was like, taste level, not so sure. But the guy is like a genuine car guy. And I don't know what has happened since. I don't know what happened on the inside. I don't know what politics.
They had a large number of unprofitable years.
I'm just talking straight cars. Like,
the cars themselves.
The DB11 comes out, and in addition to it being, I'm being kind to it here, horribly ugly. I
don't think it's that bad. I don't think it's great looking.
Oh God, the overhangs. There's like the overhangs. I just think the car was overstyled, trashy, and all wrong.
It is overstyled. It lacks the sort of elegance and understatedness of the earlier cars.
And by the way, the earlier cars are kind of a hard act to follow. Like I admit that.
Also true.
But ugly's ugly, and I thought that car was ugly. And then it drove badly. Like it's the new twin turbo downsized V12. So
it's mere 5.2 liters instead of 6 liters.
Right. But it had more power, but I just got immediately, I was like, this is everything I knew and loved about the DB9 was gone. Like the elegance gone, the opulence gone, the taste level gone, the sound of the engine gone, the steering, Aston Martin steering gone. And here I am in now another anonymous feeling, GT that was a little bit confused. It rode too hard. It rode like shit. If I was a short drive, and I just did not like the way it drove. I didn't like anything about it. And I was very upset because I was with Carlos Lago, my co-host from Motor Trend, and it was his press car, and he put a camera in the car, and he was doing these like daily roundup things where he was like, a quick spin around the block. And I don't think he published what I said because I was so negative. I'm like, Carlos, I don't know what you see in this car. I think it's fucking terrible. And then the Vantage happened. And
the new V8 Vantage, the current V8 Vantage, yeah.
I don't like the way it looks at all.
I mean, yes, it looks like a fish that's very surprised.
Yeah, I guess it does. I don't like the side grills, like, that they look like a spade.
I honestly don't know what the side looks like. I saw the front and I was like, I'm never looking at this car again, so I never got past the front end.
The back looks trashy, but it actually, at night, if the whole taillight is illuminated, there are some really great features, but as a whole, it just doesn't work. But to drive, it was so bad. And this was not a press car. This was a dealer car. And they wanted me to drive it, and the salesman wanted to hear what I had to say. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I refused to talk to him initially because this poor guy's got to go sell these cars. And if I, as the sort of the independent voice come in and just tell him how bad this car actually is, I'm just going to make this poor guy's life more difficult. And that's not what I want to do. But he pushed, and I was finally like, okay. So the only people who ever drive this car are doing it because they're badge whores. There's nothing to like here. The car is terrible. This chassis tuning is not done. It pogoed constantly. It had this weird circular motion around the end. So you're going around a corner and it never settled down. It never stopped bouncing. The steering was totally nonlinear. So you start to turn and the car would turn and then it would abruptly change ratio without changing any weighting. So you didn't know it was happening and you'd like smack into the car next to you the first couple times you went around a corner. Like the brake pedals by wire, and you actually, no matter how hard you tried, could not come to a smooth stop. And if you let up, it would take off again. And it would like unlock the torque converter bypass and just take off. If you went slowly, you'd come to a screeching halt and then do one of these. There was just absolutely nothing I liked about the car, including that AMG V8, which is very powerful. It's a 4-liter twin-turbo AMG V8.
It's the AMG GT engine?
Yeah. It's the 4-liter that's in all the AMG 63
C63s.
And I can say a lot of really positive things about that, but it does not make music. It makes noise. Aston's V8s make this screaming melody. And, the press releases were all, we've gone to huge measures to change the timbre of the sound or whatever. Bullshit. It was 100% C63 AMG. Blindfolded, I would have... Anyone who knows the AMG cars would have been like, yeah, that's 100% an AMG engine. And I don't know what happened on the back end, except on this case, I talked to a friend who worked there, not a friend, a colleague, and he's like, yeah, Andy pushed the car out. It wasn't ready. The engineers told him it wasn't ready. We're running into financial troubles, and he was like, ship it. Just ship it to the dealership. It doesn't have to be done. Like, we just have to get the car out and on sale because we need the revenue. I get it. I'm sure the guy was working with a whole bunch of balls in the air that I don't even understand. I don't begin to understand. But from the outside, I have to say, Bez was there. The cars were amazing. Everything was great. Dr. Betts leaves. He's replaced by Andy Palmer. The cars aren't great. And so now, yesterday in the news, was a surprise announcement that Andy was replaced by a German again. So here we go, back to Germans, and by a German named Tobias Moers. And Tobias was the head of AMG. And he made his name making AMG a thing. Like, he's kind of the guy responsible for all of the current, like, I guess the previous generation of all the cool AMG shit. Like all the 63 cars, the 63 engine was his baby. All of that was under him. So I'm excited, like, because here's what I think. The DBX, which is Aston's SUV, and then I'll let you talk. I'm sorry, I'm rambling nonstop. The DBX, which is Aston Martin's SUV, is just about to drop, and so it's a strange time to replace the CEO of the company. Except that, knowing what happened with Vantage, where Andy was like, "Fuck, we're delayed. Ship it. It doesn't matter. We're going to hit these deadlines." My guess is that the Germans had to come in and help him because AMG or Mercedes is providing all of the
engines and
the
electrical
chassis
stuff.
engine, right?
Yeah.
And my guess is that things weren't running to the board's satisfaction or the new investor's satisfaction. And why not put the guy in who made AMG a thing? And so I think that's why Andy was ousted, kind of without his knowledge, and replaced by Tobias. And Tobias is total hick. Like, the dude opens his mouth and a German farmer falls out. Complete redneck. I mean, loves to blow shit up on his farm. Like, he's just
It tells you a lot about why AMG cars are the way they are.
Yeah, they're totally his personality. They're unhinged. They're a little bit over the top, and that's exactly what AMG needed. So he was 100% the right guy to do that. And as long as he can sort of channel British sophistication into the sense of humor of what he's instilled in AMG cars, those cars could be like, there's a chance of them being great again. Like,
yeah, if they can hang around and stay in business long enough. Because, I mean, if you look at the history of Aston Martin, it's just this continuous stream. I mean, it's truly absurd. A lot of these small manufacturers are like that. Like, historically, it's been the case. I mean, probably one of the most famous guys who had anything to do with Aston Martin is David Brown, which is where DB comes from. And he made, like, I think, industrial equipment and tractors and stuff. And he bought Aston Martin in 1947. And he also bought this other company called Lagonda. And he bought Lagonda specifically because he wanted an engine that they had. And so he combined the Lagonda engine with the Aston Martin car that they had under development. And that was where the first DB car, the first real production DB car came from, which is the DB2. And that engine, by the way, was a twin cam inline six of 2.6 liters designed by some dude named Walter Owen Bentley. Walter Owen Bentley started his own company called Bentley, which you may have heard of, in the teens. And he kind of ran it into the ground because they were like busy winning Le Mans and building streetcars that basically Depression era folks couldn't afford. And so the company sort of quietly went out of business and went into receivership, which is what British car companies do with regularity. And it was, put under the control of administrators who were like, we have to turn this debt into some money somehow. And there were some sealed bids, and eventually this company called Rolls-Royce bought Bentley, which had been sort of their rival. And so Walter Owen Bentley was kind of upset that his previous rival ended up with his company. And I think part of the deal was he had to stay on for some number of years. And as soon as that period was up, he was like, okay, I'm out. And he went to Lagonda and designed a V12 that was really great in the 1930s. And then after the war, still at Lagonda, he designed this inline six, which was also really great. And so that's why
Were
David
they the
Brown...
same engine?
No. It's the six cylinder is a twin cam. And the V12 is not a twin cam. So that's what Bentley did after he sort of left his own company after they went out of business. So anyway, David Brown's like, I'd like your motor and I'd like your car, and then he made the first DB, and then of course that became the DB2. The 3 was a race car, DB4, DB5, which is of course the Goldfinger James Bond car. And so that was kind of the golden era of Aston. Like, all the most expensive Aston Martins are from that era, from the David Brown era. And that's also when they won Le Mans. They were trying to do sports car racing for a long time, and they kept losing to Jaguar and Ferrari. But they finally did win Le Mans once in 1959 with Carroll Shelby driving and Roy Salvadori. So they got that, which they would have been really excited about. So anyway, that's like sort of the golden era. And then I think
first golden era, right?
Yes, their first golden era. And then I think by the early 70s, they had a lot of debt. And someone famously said, "Hey, David, I would like to buy one of your Aston Martins, but I'd like to do it at cost. Can you sell me one at cost?" And David's like, "Sure." And he gave him an invoice for more than the MSRP of the car because they lost money on every single one that they made. So that was the state of things at Aston. I think it was maybe a passion project. But at some point, David Brown's like, okay, I've had enough of this. I think he paid off all their debts and then sold the company for £100 to its next sort of... And then in the 70s, it just went through a bunch of owners. They kind of went out of business in the 70s. And then they shut the factory down for 6 months in the mid-70s. Like, it was just a bad time. But many great cars from the David Brown period, and also I would say from the 80s. Really sophisticated motors.
So what happened in the 80s? So when do they become sort of
So
Jaguar.
They ended up with Ford. Ford bought them in 1987. But they basically made the same car. So the last David Brown car, the DBS, was the V8 that was around forever and ever and ever, like until the 80s. Actually, into the 90s, really, because it became the Virage, which is the car that has the Scirocco taillights. And then that car became the V8, and they made a twin supercharged, I think it was twin supercharged version of that, which had initially 550 and then 600 horsepower. This is in the 90s. But the V8 Vantage of the 70s is one of my favorite cars. I love this car because everyone always says it looks like a Mustang. But in 1977, when that car came out, it was the fastest accelerating car you could buy, despite having 4 seats and looking like a Mustang and being trimmed like a Rolls-Royce. But it was faster to 60 miles an hour than a Ferrari Boxer, than a Countach, than a Porsche 930, than all of that sort of heavy-duty exotic stuff. But it was also very luxurious. And that motor, so after the Lagonda motor, there were 2 other motors that were both designed by the same dude. They were both twin cam heads, and the V8, which appeared in, it actually was supposed to go in the DBS originally, the first DBS, which is 67, but the motor wasn't done in time, so they just took the old 6-cylinder motor and put that in. But they're both designed by this guy named Tadek Marek, a great engine designer. And that V8 was the same one that they used in supercharged form into the late 90s with 600 horsepower, if that tells you anything. So, but yeah, they were owned also by some Greek people. There was Peter Livianos, but they were always sort of like, oh, we'll come up with this weird creative deal where we have to come up with some number of pounds and get 37.5% of the company, and like it was always just staggering along, like laying off people and then rehiring them, and it was like that all, between David Brown and Ford, so 72 to 87, and then Ford had them from 87 to right around the Betts period.
Right, and so then is that when the DB? I know nothing about these old Astons. DB7.
Yes, that was the first Ford, like all Ford car to come out. And that car was basically, because Jaguar owned them, they were like, let's take an XJS and sort of use some of that.
And make it even more unreliable.
Yeah, so we'll take that and then we'll use a smaller but supercharged version of the XJS motor and Miata NA interior door handles.
It had Miata door handles?
The interior door handles are from an NA Miata on the early DB7s.
And you were NA door handles were not exactly the most luxurious piece of...
No, they're pretty low rent. I'll go to my garage and take a photo of it to use for the insert, since I have an NA Miata, but no
I have a
DB7
friend that had a DB7 and it crushed him. This is a guy with lots of money, and he, I think, lost more money on his DB7 than any other car. And it was a heartbreak for him, because it was like a childhood dream car, turned into a nightmare. The car broke constantly.
Yeah.
And even when it did work, I don't think it worked particularly well.
I have always had a soft spot for them. The one to get would be, so the early ones were supercharged 6 cylinders, and then the Vantage version had the 6-liter V12, which also appeared in the first Vanquish. Mm-hmm. And is this maybe the same motor that ended up in the DB9, probably?
Probably. If it was actually a 5.9?
Because
the 6-liter V12
it's two Ford Mondeo engines joined together.
That's the motor.
Yeah, so the late DB7 V12, the GT is the one to get, I suppose. But yeah, so they've just were always changing hands and struggling along, which they continue to do today. And their longest period of stability was the David Brown period, because it was 1947 to 72-ish. Even Ford couldn't outlast that. It was 5 more years.
Well, let's be honest here. None of the companies that Ford bought did well under their stewardship.
Yes, because they at the same time had Jaguar and Land Rover, and all of those things have been spun off since. And Volvo, yes.
Yeah. Nothing did well. Saab didn't do well under GM. A lot of these sort of American.
Yeah, Chrysler, Lamborghini didn't go well either.
Right.
But of course, when VW Group gets a hold of things, then they finally settle down, because that's what happened with Lamborghini and Bentley and Bugatti.
Yeah, with all of them. I'm wondering, is there a brand that did not thrive under the stewardship of the Germans?
Because Rolls-Royce, BMW.
Yeah. What?
And BMW Land Rover, BMW Rover.
Well, okay, BMW, let's think about this for a second, because BMW Rolls-Royce is still in existence and still selling cars.
Yes, that's right, because they got separated. Okay, so then BMW Land Rover, BMW Rover.
They did. I mean, so Rover died, but that was so the Rover brand died. But Range Rover, I think that catapulted them to where they are now. I mean, I don't think it worked financially, but that first Range Rover,
the L322, yes. Epic. Although having owned one myself, I will say that I do not recommend it to anyone.
The repair bills are just as epic as its off-road prowess, which is just as epic as, the
yes, you just hope you don't get both at the same time. Ideally, it's not breaking down while you're off-road somewhere remote.
No, they're fine. They can cross the Serengeti, but going across a Whole Foods parking lot, you're in trouble.
Yeah, it was very costly to own. I mean, the thing had 40,000 miles on it, and I still spent an astronomical amount of money keeping it going. Yeah.
That's unfortunately the experience that everyone I know that had.
But it was very good.
Them. See?
Yes.
See?
It was, I mean,
you loved it.
I know. I replaced it with the Cayenne Turbo, and I actually liked it better than the Cayenne Turbo. Yeah. I don't exactly know why, because it's not really better in any measurable way.
Yeah, there's something about
Cayenne Turbo.
We should do a Range Rover episode. There's something really magic about those cars. But yeah, I mean, the reason I'm thinking like, wow, have all the brands done well under German stewardship is because here we are back now with Aston Martin. It's the CEO is German. Daimler only owns 5. I think it's only 5% of
5 or 10. Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder if now that there's German in charge, if Daimler will acquire a larger percent of it.
Ah, and interesting. It could be the thing that saves them. I mean, if you're talking about possible outcomes at this point after all of this financial unrest and management change, if anyone can do it, it'll be the Germans.
The Germans, yeah.
Based on their track record.
I just don't particularly care for like a German interpretation of. I shouldn't say that. I mean,
think about Rolls-Royce. Think about modern Rolls-Royce.
Yeah, but where the Germans like. I've always had a problem with like Bentley and Rolls-Royce because they and in some respects that first Range Rover, it's like Germans will do a caricature of like British.
But that's what American buyers, who are very important, obviously, I think a lot of foreign buyers like that.
You're right. But I just had a Bentley Continental, so I just drove a Continental GT V8 for the first time, and it's been out since 16 or something. It's been a while, so I finally got in them. And the big thing about that car is it switched from the Audi A8 layout, so the D chassis Audi with the engine in front of the headlights layout.
Has that really been out since 2016? I thought it was only like within the last year or two.
I think it was right around when I left Motor Trend, and that was I think they were already on sale at that point, and that was 3 years ago. So that was 17. So somewhere around there. But anyway, I mean, I'm tardy to the party on having driven that, but it's Panamera based now, so it went from a sort of handling compromised Audi layout to the best of breed Porsche layout. And oh my God, that car's good. Like, there's nothing cheap in that car. So like, I have a problem with Bentayga, for example, because Bentayga is very clearly not a Bentley. It's very clearly a Volkswagen
Q7?
Audi product. Yeah, it's a Q7. Same thing with Urus. I drove a Urus.
Oh my God. Recently. I drove a Urus a couple weeks ago.
Holy shit.
It's not bad. My expectations were much higher for the price point.
All right, we're doing an episode on this because I was mortified. Dynamically, very good. 100%
and like very fast. Like it's like 0 to 60 in 3.2 seconds or something obscene like that.
Yeah. And yet, it does it without putting a smile on your face at all. You're like, this was a very efficient 0 to 100 kilometers per hour time. We have done it in 3.24 seconds. All right, did you have fun? 9! The fuck? It's a fucking Lamborghini. The whole point of a Lamborghini is to put a smile on your face. Not to race some. Oh God! This is my point about the Germans, and this is like what scares me about it. They're like, yeah, we will dilute this brand down to its component parts. Rolls-Royce, it will be luxury and silence and this and whatever. And I think BMW's done a fine job with most of Rolls-Royce, but I don't think they've done that great of a job with Lamborghini, for example, in the Urus. And I don't think Bentley did that great of a job with the original Conti. It sold well.
Yeah, I agree with that. The original Conti for sure.
Right. The Mulsanne was unbelievable.
Yes, the Mulsanne. So what happens is if you have them, you're like, please give me an unrestrained. I mean, what they do is they say, well, we're going to make this thing that's kind of platform sherry for profit reasons.
For profit, right.
And get lots of people in these things so that we can then afford. I mean, it's what Porsche does, right? They make Cayenne so that they can make GT2 RSs.
Right.
And so as long as the DNA
Porsche
exists somewhere, like if the DNA exists in the GT2 RS and the DNA exists in a naturally aspirated V12, one of two left in the world you can buy in the Aventador, and the Mulsanne exists because they made so many Contis, then
I'm okay with it. And
it's better than the company going out of business.
You're right. And second gen Continental fixed my problems with the original one. There are some definite, clear lineage traces to the underpinnings of that car. But the underpinnings of that car are not an Audi. They're now a Porsche. So I would argue that this car handles way better than it ever needs to. But excess capability is a really good thing when you're buying a very expensive car. It's the underwhelming stuff, like a Bentayga is underwhelming, or a Urus is underwhelming. The Conti was brilliant. And everything in the car said, this is something different than the car it's based on, even when I could trace the origins. Porsche's very good at that also with the Macan. Like the Macan is really good, and it's based on a Q5 that is a nice Audi, but it should never have a Porsche badge on it. But Porsche masked that really well. So we'll see whether a German in charge of Aston can make it work again. I'm a little worried that the personality of Aston's is already way too AMG. Like those cars are way too AMG, but not as good.
So you said golden age, first golden age. It sounds like you would classify the second golden age as the VH era. VH is vertical horizontal, which is the name of that aluminum chassis that they used for the DB9 and V8 Vantage, or V12 Vantage.
It's not aluminum.
It's not?
It's aluminium!
Oh, yes, of course. Sorry.
Stupid. It's British. It's got that stupid extra hidden syllable. Aluminium.
Well, there's actually a letter in there, too. They spell it differently.
Yeah, of course they had to, because we're making fun of them. I mean, they don't pronounce it color, do they? It's color.
True.
Yeah, right.
So you would classify that as the second golden age of Aston?
100%.
I really love their V8s, their 80s stuff. I think it's wonderful, actually.
I don't know it. I would love to drive one.
Those old V8 Vantage, I mean, you'd like it because it's very muscle car-y. And it's like absurd. It's so overpowered, and there's a lot of incongruity also. I really adore those cars. And of course they did the Zagato partnership, because actually I think it was Peter Livianos, I think was the guy who was in charge of Aston at that time, bought part of Zagato also. And Aston Martin's like one of their most legendary road cars, their Ferrari 250 SWB, if you will, was the DB4 GT Zagato. And they made 19 of them, and they're worth a shitload of money. And so in the 80s, they're like, oh, let's rekindle the Zagato relationship. And so they made this thing which I thought was ugly for the first 20 years.
It's probably a long time to think something's ugly.
I thought it was ugly for 20 years. I don't think they're ugly anymore. I think they're great now. And I think it's much better looking than the SZ, which is another Zagato product from that era. I can't tell if the screen froze or if you were just aghast.
I'm not frozen. I'm aghast. I would never use the word aghast, but I'm fucking horrified.
Yes, you would. Didn't you use the word milieu 2 to 3 episodes ago?
Yeah, but I did it with like a false, pretentious milieu. Like I can't. He is, by the way, guys, talking about the Alfa Romeo SZ, which was the 1990th car of all the 1990s cars, and I completely want one. And he's wrong about it being.
We've talked about it before.
He's right about it being ugly. Yeah.
Included the insert of the terrible 80s ad of it. But anyway, I think that the Zagato V8 is really pretty cool, and all of that stuff is really cool. So that's maybe the third or second really golden age of Aston Martin. They were pretty on the money all the way from the 50s until like the 90s.
Really?
Early 90s. I think so.
See, I guess I just don't know that much about 80s, late, like to me they just kind of, Aston died off in the 70s, and like in the 80s they just were nothing. I don't remember reading.
X-Pac V8s, super, super cool cars. You get the factory 6.3 liter version, normally it's a 5.3. You get a factory 6.3. They even made factory 7 liters. Mm-hmm. It was very much like, if you would like this, we can build it for you. And
but it wasn't in the mainstream. I mean,
no. Yeah. Very bespoke, very like boutique-y. But they're really wonderful cars. And there was the whole Prince of Wales thing. So they got their Royal Warrant, which is very exciting for British companies. Royal Warrant is when it has a little crest on the ad where it's like, by appointment to Her Majesty or His Majesty, whatever. Anyway, the Prince of Wales, Charles, got one, I think, he got a DB6 when he finished university, and then he commissioned later a V8, which they actually name a spec after him, the Prince of Wales spec. Nobody cares. I'm going to be quiet about this issue. I don't think anybody cares except for me.
I don't not care. I just don't know anything about this. As you're talking, I'm listening because it's all interesting stuff, but I'm racking my brains thinking about, I have multiple. I'm racking my brain thinking about, like, did any Aston Martin enter my consciousness throughout the 1980s or 90s? And the answer was no. Because even in the 90s, the car magazines, I sort of like transport back to like 1993, Jason, thought, oh, well, that's just a tarted up, more expensive Jaguar.
For the DB7, perhaps. But
I guess it was the DB7. But the V8s, I think, weren't they old? Like really old at that point?
Late 60s.
Right. I just don't I don't think the golden era keeps going until the person's dead.
The thing about those cars was that the US cars have really ugly bumpers, but the European cars, which still had Webers, like Lamborghini was doing, they were like the last two people left using downdraft Webers. But those cars just had all this power and dog legs, and they were just this really like vibey British thing that was like, if you know kind of cars. And that, I mean, they're pretty expensive now for that reason. I think that they have a really dedicated following. It seems very New Englandy. They seem to be very, like on the West Coast, almost nobody does anything with these cars, but in New England, people are all about them. And obviously Old England also. And
the thing I love about the V8 Vantages, or the Vantage, or even DB9, is that they're kind of douchey-proof too.
Yes.
They're very gentlemanly. You pull in a, I hate to say this, but like a contemporary Ferrari.
Especially a mid-engined one.
Right, and you're like, you're in a 360, what are you trying to prove? You pull up an Vantage, and the people's reaction to it is, that's stunning, what is it? Mm-hmm. A friend that had a black on black late 4.7, and he had the loudest exhaust I've ever heard in my life on it, and I made him get the license plate V quiet, which just made us laugh to no end. But I mean, like, literally a block away, you could hear the thing start.
It sounds wonderful too.
It sounded so good, and he did this crossover pipe. I will find it. In fact, I will embed a link because he and I during lunch. This friend of mine was the guy who did all the Motortron videos with me, and who does all of our Icons videos now is Anthony Esposito. Incredibly talented guy, and loved the idea of having an Aston. So sort of like realized that for the price of barely more than a GTI, he could have an Aston. But he put this crossover pipe on the exhaust, and then a Larini exhaust on the thing, and it was one of the best sounds I've ever heard in my life. And on a lunch break during 2 days of shooting in Palm Springs, we did during the LC shoot, if you guys want to know, we did a little video for the company that sent him the exhaust, just to sort of make it like help them out, like a marketing. He just gave it to them. The noise this thing made was so unbelievable. But it was hilarious to me that like here he is in this like violently loud, offensively loud car, and everywhere he go, people smiled. Like you make a Ferrari half that loud, and people are going to be giving you the finger. Like you make any other car half that loud, but they'd be like, "What the fuck? Oh, it's a gentleman driving by."
This is the power of good taste, in my opinion. Yeah. It's the same reason with vintage cars. People are always enthusiastic if you're in a vintage car. Almost always enthusiastic if you're in a vintage car. And there's less of this sort of money factor, and I really appreciate that because it indicates that you're a true enthusiast as opposed to trying to prove something or draw attention to yourself.
And Astons have it. I wish I had the money. I wish I had the funds to do a V12S.
Yeah, and those things sound wonderful too. Like I would so much rather listen to an Aston Martin V12 than a 550 Maranello or a 599.
Why would you bother listening to 550 Maranello? They don't make any sound.
I know. I mean,
and
they sound better than 599s too. It's only until you get to like F12 and FF where it's like, ooh, I don't know.
599 GTO is when Ferrari figured out that if they changed the way the exhaust manifolds were routed, they could get that we actually all. So this is the weird thing about V12s is like the world thinks they sound amazing.
Very sensitive to setup.
Some of them do, and most don't. And then Aston sounded
Epic.
I'm going to reserve epic for like 812, Ferrari 812.
I like the sort of more throaty, more guttural sound of the V12s from Aston. The ripping silk is what you get from a Ferrari, and with the Aston you get this sort of big-chested, like really throaty sound, which
and it doesn't get captured on video. Like,
no.
My favorite, probably still one of my favorite videos we ever did for MotorTrend, that Ant and I did, was that V12 Vantage S manual, which is frankly actually the reason he wound up buying his 4.7. And when I watch that video occasionally to sort of learn from what we did right and wrong, and we took it on dry lake and it was fun. But I can hear very clearly all the sound bites of that car that we used, and it sounds great, but it sounded much more complex in person.
Yes.
Like there's so much more going on.
And they have this sort of loud button and the quiet button, which is pretty normal now, but I think was kind of unusual at the time. But what it would normally do is it would run it in quiet mode until you reached a certain point, and then it would open up the bypass valve. But Aston Martin having the foresight that they do, they made it such that the valve would just always be open if you remove fuse number, I think it's 22 or 23.
For every car, yeah.
But there's one fuse that you remove, and it doesn't control anything except for the exhaust valve, and you take it out, and it's just open all the time.
And because Dr. Bez is the hero, I think it was in the owner's manual. Like, it's a known thing. Like, we had to put this stupid thing in to comply with drive by regulations, so here's how you get rid of it.
That's heroic to me.
That's completely fucking heroic. And the funny thing was, like, other car companies, like even Ferrari, all of these loud exhausts that we have now are way louder than anything we ever had before. Loud cars of the 70s are basically silent compared to today's cars. And it's because they have computer-controlled valves, so they can open and close and fade them, at different speeds. And you drive like a Ferrari, and they stay pretty close. They're closed most of the time. And then over a certain RPM and over a certain speed, they open. That was not good enough for Dr. Betts. You start a Rapide, which is like the most elegantly beautiful long sedan in the world. And it's like, and it does the V12 starter and then shuts right up, because during startup, you're allowed to make more noise. And then it has to idle quietly. So it just sits there and it's like, and then as you're driving, the valves open and close and open and close and open and close, because the regulations are at 22 kilometers an hour in this gear, you have to make less than this noise. So he pushed it to the limit where it's constantly opening and closing so that it would pass the test but be deafeningly loud at any other time. So it winds up being actually a really weird experience, and I don't like it, but it's hilarious that you're driving along and it starts out at idle, it's quiet, right off idle, it gets really loud, then quiet, and then really loud. So you get this constantly opening and closing, and you're like, this is why these cars were fucking amazing. This guy was nuts. I want to make a good car, I have to deal with this asshole litigation, legal shit, and yeah. So I hope there's a chance we can get back there, because Tobias Moers
Future classics.
Yeah.
They're already really well regarded, but they're pretty cheap. They're just they're expensive to keep going. They have
Vantages?
They have known for, the V12s are known for periodically having catastrophic engine failure, and the clutches are notoriously undersized on the V8s.
So there's a replacement that you can do. You replace the V8 clutch with the V12, which apparently bolts right in, and instead of a $3,200 clutch, it's a $4,000 clutch. So it's they're both expensive, but it's incrementally more expensive. And then you have the big V12 clutch on your V8, and you never have to worry about it again. But we have, between the two of us, we probably have 7 friends that drive V12 Vantages, V8 Vantages, and I haven't heard of any, knock on wood. One car that I know, it was a V8, spun a rod bearing, and it was such a rare thing that Aston paid for a new engine. It was out of warranty, and they were curious, what the response was, kind of hilariously, hold on, it's a V8, it's not a V12? Because the V12s do this all the time. That was their reaction. But they comped an engine for it. It only had 16,000 miles on it or something. And it was it must have just been a perfectly badly timed bubble in the oil supply at 7,500 RPM in the middle of a corner. I mean, it was under pretty extreme conditions. But other than that, none of my V8 friends have any issues with the cars. They're reliable, and they absolutely adore them. Because you're not going to get a better experience. I'm sorry.
Especially for the money.
Well, even now, like I think about like GT3 Touring is probably the best all-around sports car in terms of like bang for the buck and performance and drivability and usability and build quality and all over.
And
but
like objective competence, sort of objective sanitary rational competence.
Right, but I would take a V12S manual in a second over.
Yeah, because it's just that much more emotive and sort of exotic and has this sort of specialness to it that is decidedly un-German. So I guess it remains to be seen whether how they sort of navigate this, but hopefully they'll be around for a bit longer because it's obviously a very storied mark that's over 100 years old.
I'm praying for Aston Martin, but I think putting the guy who made AMG the thing that it is in that seat is, I'll bet that he does some pretty cool things. So we'll see.
All right.
Are we done with this episode? Can I go start looking like Craigslist ads for
$28,000 V8
Vantages? Got COVID and needs to pay for medical bills, and I could be that terrible, horrible person who wants to buy an Aston because of it. I can't. I'm not buying anything.
And we should also remind people to subscribe. And
why would they do that?
So they could listen to more rantings and ravings.
Insult? Yes, ravings and rantings of a crazy person. That is right. If you like this, you should probably click on the subscribe button and tell all of your friends about the Carmudgeon Show because, unlike other shows, we can speak with a British accent. That was a Robin Hood Men in Tights reference.
Oh. I actually
unlike other Robin Hoods, I can speak with a British accent, an English accent, I think you said. Anyway, yes, Carmudgeon Show is all about cars because we don't have lives. Click, like, and subscribe, and don't forget you can get these really cool T-shirts, like this one, which is a Lancia Delta Integrale wheel somewhere in the description, and we're here every week, so like and subscribe. I'm just going to keep talking until you say something.
Oh, I just assumed we were done.
And we are.